Say it's lit, right? lit. Real, live, lit. Right? The revolution is lit.
Uhuru comrades, and welcome to today's Omali Taught Me Sunday study, the Institute of African Internationalist Study, live with the leader of the African nation, Chairman Omali Yeshitela. This week, we are continuing with the series Colonialism as the Mode of Production, with today's episode focusing on Black power and the US front of the African Revolution. We will focus on the historic struggle against colonialism inside US borders, with focus on the Black power movement of the 1960s, in which the African People's Socialist Party has kept alive over the last 50 years. We will have on this panel, along with Chairman Omali Yeshitela, African Socialist International Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, and ASI Africa Region Director Tafarie Mugeri. Before we begin today's study, I ask that you take this moment right now to like and share this video and tag someone to participate in today's lesson. Let's broaden the reach of this discussion. We need you to make that happen. You know the impact of these studies on you as an individual. Take the time right now to change someone's life and tag them in the chat section. Share this study far and wide. We must struggle against the counterinsurgency censorship of African internationalism. So we thank you for sharing. To start off our discussion, we'll have an overview that reintroduces some of the points made last week, explaining colonialism as the mode of production, which will help us to understand the basis for the Black power movement in the US and why the fundamental problem confronting African people remains the colonial contradiction. Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the theory of African internationalism has taught us that Europe and the white world came into existence off the backs of Africa and African people, and subsequently by colonizing virtually every place on the planet as part of forcibly locking the world into a global parasitic economic system, which we know now as colonial capitalism. Prior to the colonization of Africa, destitute poverty defined the conditions of Europe, a land of warring tribes for a limited amount of natural resources. There existed plagues that wiped out nearly half of its population, famine, war, and cultural and ideological backwardness. Their economy was based in feudalism, an oppressive and exploitative system where peasants or serfs were tied to land producing value for the nobility in an unequal exchange for basic living necessities. This untenable economic system, the desperation of a dying Europe, is the motivating factor, the material basis for the assault on Africa and the rest of the world. Following Europe's attack on Africa, we begin to see Europe's problems being resolved through the rape and pillage of our Africa, the stolen labor of the colonial slave trade, a better way of life, and a common identity was achieved for Europeans, white people, through this process. In other words, Europe rescued itself from the clutches of feudalism through colonialism. Next. While colonialism has been written about extensively, It was Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the development of the theory of African internationalism that has helped us to understand colonialism as the mode of production, the origin of capitalism. Before African internationalism, the explanations of the emergence of capitalism by highly regarded theoreticians such as Karl Marx and V.I. Lenin centered the colonizer as the starting point of history and colonized subjects as a footnote. This is why this question has never been properly understood until now. African internationalism clearly shows that you cannot have a capitalist world economy without the colonial enslavement and continued domination of African people. This theory helped us to understand why socialism hasn't achieved long-term success. It's helped to show the historic and present-day opportunism of the white left, who would fight for a gentler, kinder colonialism, recognizing that the relationship of colonizer and colonized serves their material interests. Understanding the world through the lens of the African working class, the only social force in the world who has no stakes in the existence of colonial capitalism, helps to turn the world right side up, to see the world as it actually is, and gives us the to what end to building a new world free of exploitation and oppression. Next. Understanding the colonial mode of production reveals the relationship or dialectic of white wealth and African impoverishment. The white nationalist explanations and justifications for the 600-year war on Africa and African people no longer satisfies reality with the intervention of African internationalism. Europe and the entire white world didn't achieve its wealth based on any work ethic, cleverness, frugality, divine rights, or something to that effect. It has acquired all it has through rape, theft, and murder. White people have full refrigerators today because an African child somewhere is forced to make it on an empty stomach until tomorrow. If you walk outside and see gentrification, where a new luxury condo and Starbucks replaced the African elderly couple that lived in their neighborhood for decades, this is an immediately recognizable example of this dialectic. White communities continuing to grow and expand at the expense of the disappearing African population. Next. The crucial role that colonialism and Africans have played as the pedestal for this world economy was revealed under the leadership of Marcus Garvey, who fought for African liberation and unification. This was the biggest threat to a parasitic economy that feasts off of the value that African workers produce. Marcus Garvey was clear that we had to fight for Africa, that we are one African people no matter where we've been dispersed, and that we had to struggle for self-determination and freedom. This explains why the most powerful anti-colonial movement came under assault. Garvey's mission to unite and free Africa challenged the existence of colonial capitalism. The white so-called communists, in collaboration with the African petty bourgeoisie like W.E.B. Du Bois, viciously attacked and sought to destroy the Garvey movement. They succeeded in their efforts and had effectively written Garvey out of history. African internationalism rescued Garvey from opportunist revisionism and developed his theory of African fundamentalism. The African People's Socialist Party is the Garvey movement of the 21st century. Next. Our party's work to forward the African Revolution took on the task of examining the world, how our present conditions came to be, and this led us to the understanding that if African people are to be free and capable of shaping our own destinies, we must overthrow colonialism. Chairman Omali Yeshitela has fought for over 5 decades to drive the colonial question to the center so that the African liberation movement can be clear about what we must organize around. Because of this history, today we see colonialism being discussed everywhere. The more masses coming into political consciousness are able to recognize colonialism as a fundamental problem. Over the course of our party's 50-year history, we have struggled against notions that we must center our work around fighting for the symptoms of colonialism, or racism, which is the ideological underpinnings of colonialism. Struggling against racism, as the chairman has pointed out, is a self-defeating waste of time. It centers the opinions and feelings of the colonizer. It prevents you from engaging in a struggle for power over your own life. In fact, it doesn't even make power a necessity. Looking at revolutionary struggles around the world, you never hear the Chinese, Vietnam, or Cuba, for example, fighting against racism. So it has been transformative for the entire African liberation movement to define our struggle as one against colonialism. It becomes tangible, It is something we can fight against concretely, and our success will be defined by the overthrow of this social system, which will come as a consequence of the African Revolution. Next. In Chairman Omali Yeshitela's latest political report to the Third Seventh Congress Plenary of the African People's Socialist Party, he features an entire chapter dedicated to colonialism as a mode of production, citing works like Hosea Jaffe's A History of Africa, which serves as historical documentation of the European assault on Africa. It shows the amount of theft of African resources over centuries. However, Chairman is the only one who has taken this type of documentation, deepening it to explain the relationship of European wealth to African impoverishment. Next. We can't treat colonialism as something that happened in the past that resulted in the world capitalist economy. Based on what colonialism is, we are able to understand this as an existing reality. African people throughout the world are colonized. We are dominated by a foreign and alien state power for profit today. Next. A mode of production defines how goods and services are produced. It also defines all of life, the society, and its values. How are goods and services produced under capitalism? Through the colonial domination of African people and the theft of our resources. That is true today. All of life, therefore, has been centered around the colonial mode of production. Next. Understanding the colonial mode of production has not only helped to define the work before the African working class, it's also helped to define the role of the colonizer population, especially those who consider themselves communists. With capitalism revealed to have its origin in the colonial question, a white person cannot say they are anti-capitalist and in the same breath support colonialism. If capitalism is to be defeated, colonialism must be destroyed. The relationship of colonizer and colonized must come to an end. The party has resolved the question about what role white people can and should play, and that is to organize anti-colonialist colonizers under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. Next. For 600 years, African people have been forced to produce and reproduce life for the colonizer. Every dream and aspiration, every meal and every paycheck, every vacation and every birth of a white child owes its existence to African people. Without the colonization of Africa and African people, the lives of white people would look completely different. In fact, white people as a concept would not exist. Africa's own development in history has been disrupted through the process of colonialism. This is why Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party has assumed the task of completing the Black Revolution of the 1960s so that African people can produce and reproduce life for ourselves, for our Africa, once again. Uhuru. So that was just an overview, again, touching on some of the points that we discussed last week as we introduced this question of colonialism as the mode of production. So that concludes our overview. And now I would like to introduce the leader of the African Revolution, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, to intervene in this discussion we've just opened up to further deepen this overview and our understanding as colonialism as the mode of production. Uhuru, Chairman.
My host must give me there. No, okay. Uhuru, comrade. Thank you so much, Comrade Director Akili. I think by now many people, other than those who are members of our party and the Uhuru movement, have come to understand the significance, to some extent, of this question of colonialism. We've heard words surrounding colonialism for a number of years now. In different at different times, and most recently, the party has resurrected this whole issue of colonialism. To the extent that we hear more and more people talking about colonialism today here in the United States and throughout the world. It is evident that the African People's Socialist Party has been successful up to now in making an assault on this successful assault on this notion that somehow what Africans are having to deal with is racism, that the idea is in the heads of white people. And of course, this notion that racism is the critical question is one that keeps white people in the center of the universe, that somehow Africans are simply objects of history. Even when we look at some of the most advanced ideas coming from the white world, like that by Karl Marx, who decided that the economy that exists today, the world economy that's referred to as capitalism, has its origin in something that was called primitive accumulation. How do you explain how capitalism came into existence using the concept of modes of production that was promoted and advanced a lot by Karl Marx? How do we understand the movement in Europe from feudalism, where contending forces of the society, defining the society, were the landless peasants and serfs versus those who were expropriating most of the value from the serfs and from the peasants, and who owned the land that the serfs were tied to forever. How do we explain how the society moved in Europe from this feudalism to this thing that they characterize as capitalism? Well, Marx said, I have an explanation. He called it the primitive accumulation of capital. He said the thing began with this primitive accumulation. This is the startup. He said that this is not a consequence of the capitalist production, but it is the starting point of the accumulation of capital. And he characterized that as primitive accumulation. He characterized that as turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. And he gave some other examples of what this primitive accumulation was. He talked about how England in the 1840s attacked China and turned China into a country of junkies, forcing China to take opium in exchange for tea through the Opium War, 1841 and 42. So this issue of primitive accumulation is something that came into existence. But the primitive accumulation was an explanation of the development of Europe. This is how Europe developed. This is how capitalism came into existence. And the capitalism that he talked about was a capitalism that was within Europe, the industrial, the emergence of the industrial bourgeoisie, or ruling class, in this relationship, this relationship with the industrial working class. And what is done is turn Africans and others into fodder for the development of Europe. And we don't have a history of our own. So to the extent that we follow that idea, that leadership, then Africa and African people have become a part of somebody else's history. We've become a part of European history. Although it may be characterized as Marxism, it's transformed us into part of European history. We have no history of our own. We have no identity of our own. We have no significance of our own. Our significance is simply as fodder that created Europe, developed Europe. And that means that Europe continues to be the subject and Africans are objects of history. So what has happened with the African People's Socialist Party, we recognize the truth in what Marx said in terms of African enslavement, in terms of the colonial aggression against other peoples and the theft of their resources and land being the basis for the creation of what came to be known as capitalism. But we disagree that with the idea that somehow Africans and others are simply extensions of European history. In fact, what we see is that it was an assault on African history, the history of other people that European initiated with this colonial slavery and other iterations of colonialism that has existed up to this time. And understanding this, we've worked to discover our own interests as African people. That's the thing that makes us materialists, as opposed to some whining kinds of forces that can only see our history as a part of somebody else's history, can only see our interests as something that's going to make it better for us being a part of somebody else's history. We've come to understand that Africa and African people have to enter history full blown as a free and independent people. We come to recognize that progress in the real world, human progress, is a movement toward the destruction, the total annihilation of the notion of the servitude, the enslavement of people, the domination of people or classes over other people and classes. You can't even get to what the white people and the Marxists refer to as class struggle until you can see that we have a struggle of whole peoples and what's now defined as countries dominating other peoples and other countries. That's the origin of the contradiction. That's the origin of the world economy that we're looking at. Was not the genius of white people, the genius of Europe, the far-seeing Europe. It was desperation and poverty, the same thing that drives most human development, this whole struggle to produce and reproduce life for ourselves. And Europeans, what came to be known as European, this group of warring tribes battling each other in this territory that we now know as Europe, trying to live, trying to move forward, and found the way to living and move forward by attaching themselves like a virus, like some parasitic entity onto Africa, African people, enslaving Africa, enslaving African people. Colonial slavery is what we're talking about. Now, we want to be clear that when we talk about slavery, it's colonial slavery, because the Marxists have come up with this concept of the modes of production that includes slavery. But when they talked about slavery as a mode of production, they were talking about something that happened in Europe. And then they transferred this concept of slavery into what Europe was doing to us. What Europe was doing to us was transforming Africa and much of the world into resources that would develop Europe. This was not the slavery that Marx and Europe had experienced thousands of years ago. This was a slavery that came into existence as a part of a process of the development of what has come to be known as capitalism. So this thing that connected the entire world together, that makes what they characterize as capitalism possible, the uniting economic force in the world was the attack, the assault on Africa, and then other peoples around the world, but particularly Africa. And Africa, the center of the universe in so many ways. And that's something that Africans have to come to an understanding of again, that the colonial slavery, the capitalist system has its immediate origin in Africa. The assault on Africa, the free labor, massive amount of labor. Just think about this. You're talking about 12 million square miles of wealth, richness. That constitutes the continent that we call Africa, the country that we call Africa. And all of this resources, the African people ourselves, human labor, material resources, going into the coffers of the various entities that have now come to identify themselves as a single entity, and their unity was something that was forged through capturing and enslaving African and other peoples around the world. The forced dispersal of Africans around the world for development of Europe. This is the process that gave birth to Europe, gave birth to the white man, gave birth to the global economic system that has to be destroyed if humanity is going to be liberated. And that's the task of the African People's Socialist Party. That brings us to this whole issue of slavery, not only as some kind of policy coming from what has now come to be Europe, but slavery as a mode of production, the thing that of colonialism as a mode of production that united Europe, that gave birth to Europe. There was no Europe before colonialism, colonial slavery. And so we see that the foundation of the world economy is Africa, African people and the colonized peoples of the world, if we don't understand this, we will never be able to overturn this system. And what we will always be doing is finding a way to perfect the system, to make it kinder, gentler, and what have you. And this is something that can only come at the expense of Africa, African people, and toiling and working peoples of the world. So this is where we are. This is what we are dealing with. This is why the study we're engaged in right now is so significant, Comrade Director Akile. And I just want to say this to members of our party and our movement and everybody else, that understanding this question and taking up the task to build the revolutionary organization of the African People's Socialist Party that stretches from one end of the globe to the other, which is absolutely necessary, that allows us to finish the mission that was established by Marcus Garvey, that really shook this global economy to its very foundations. The first time that we saw a single revolutionary movement of African people, not just some African revolutionary movement or politic that was designed to free Black people in Jamaica or free Black people in Trinidad or free Black people in some other place in the world, even on the continent of Africa, but one that recognized that we are part of a single revolutionary trajectory, that we are one people, have been dispersed around the world, and the liberation of African people is critical to the destruction of this entire social system. That's why we have the audacity to say that the struggle of African people over the last 50 years has been concentrated in the African People's Socialist Party. We say this without any hesitation, that the struggle of our people, the consistent struggle, the continuum of revolutionary struggle to liberate Africa and African people has been headquartered in the African People's Socialist Party, that we have become custodian of the entire revolutionary project. There is not even today a single organization other than the African People's Socialist Party that has assumed for itself this responsibility for the total liberation of every square inch of Africa, the unification of all Africa and African people globally. And that's what this discussion is about. So thank you, Comrade Director Akile. Let's move it forward. Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you so much, Chairman, and just want to really unite with and appreciate your contributions to the overview, and also just giving us the basis, the starting point of our discussion. And with that, I would like to bring up our other panelists, Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa and Director Tafarie Mugeri, who represent the African People's Socialist Party's 50-year history and our international presence. Comrade Secretary General Luwezi is in London, and Comrade Director Tafarie is in occupied Azania, or South Africa. So I would like to bring these comrades up to see if they have anything to contribute to today's discussion, the overview, and the intervention just made by the chairman. So Uhuru, we can start with you, Secretary General Luwezi, and then we'll move to Director Tafarie.
I'm trying to get my Uhuru Director Akile, Uhuru Chairman, Uhuru Director Tafarie, and all the comrades who are watching this program. As usual, this is a privilege to be on Omali Taught Me, a historical program teaching that I felt just profoundly honored just to be part of this history in the making. And what you watch it, the PowerPoints Director Akile just showed us, and you heard, as usual, the profound overview Chairman just made. What I can just say is that we have, as African people, and also as colonized people, we have, for the first time, a real explanation that binds all of us in the same trajectory, all of us. I mean, all African people, all colonized people of the world, and colonizers, for the simple reason now, we have a starting point that is correct, and the starting point that's not saying we're trying to solve the question, the problem for white people. No, the starting point is saying we don't want this colonized world anymore. We just want a world that's free from colonizers and colonized. But of course, you have to understand how this world came to fruition, how it came to being. Now, the African internationalism and the teaching of and the leadership of chairman made it clear and plain. So every contradiction in the world, it doesn't matter if it's happening in the United States or it's happening in Britain or it's happening in Ukraine, it has everything to do with colonialism as a global mode of production, which means it has everything to do from its foundation, from its start, from in Africa. So every contradiction in the world has something to do with Africa, with African people everywhere. And that's why we discuss in Ukraine. That's why we discuss Palestine. That's why we discuss Venezuela and every other contradiction in the world. This is just really, really profound. And also, he also underlines that there is no struggle of African people that is separated from each other. The struggle of black people in South Africa is not separated from the struggle of black people in Canada or in Jamaica or elsewhere. And more than that, we have to move in a coherent, united fashion, because colonialism did not attack us as different entities. There were not different trajectories. When the assault on Africa happened, it was one single trajectory. That's why whenever today you deal with France, make no mistake, United States is with France when it comes to how you deal with the colonized people anyway. It means that we Africans, we have to follow basically African internationalism, because it's the only organization today that continues the trajectory Garvey understood very well, that we have to be one united African nation in one united trajectory, in one united organization to achieve basically African self-determination. And that's why when you look at our struggle, when we say basic things, when we say black power, it should not be complicated, because black power is an anti-colonial power. But when we say white power, it's a colonial power. It should not be that difficult. When they say, how many times you heard European leaders, the colonizers, saying that defending their values? What's the foundation of their value? It's a global colonialism. So we say we are for democracy too, but ours is anti-colonial democracy, which is not the same thing as colonial democracy, which is exactly what we live under every single day. When we say we want to unite Africa, we don't want colonial borders, because the borders we have is colonialism, it's property lines. We say we want anti-colonial demarcation lines, which is what? Which is defined by revolutionary activities everywhere, because revolution can be opposed to another revolution if those revolutions are revolution of the colonized people. The African working class revolution in Jamaica cannot be opposed to African revolution to Grenada, or African revolution in Ghana cannot be opposed to African revolution to Togo or elsewhere. So it's the same revolution. So you don't need the borders. You need one trajectory, all of us, so we can move forward. So I just want to say profoundly just appreciate African internationalism and Chairman Yeshitela, because this process basically is just changing everything. The significance of African people, the significance of African People's Socialist Party, because now we know the struggle to change the world is up on our shoulders. And that's rightly we said, Chairman is the leader of not just African revolution, but the revolution to change the world, to overturn imperialism verdict, which means to end colonialism as a global mode of production. So that's profound. And that should mobilize all of us. All of us should be full of energy and to go forward with African internationalism so we can build a new world. Let's bring this global colonialism down. So I just appreciate being in this program, and I look forward to more discussion. Oh, comrade.
Yeah, Uhuru. Yeah, thank you. I just want to firstly express appreciation for being here on this program. I want to salute you, Comrade Director Akile, as well as the chairman, and ST Luwezi. I want to salute all the comrades that are on here. Yeah, just to quickly respond to what has been said, the overview, Chairman Omali Yeshitela and ST Luwezi. This is a profound theoretical breakthrough in terms of African internationalism, especially now that, we're making more emphasis on colonialism as the mode of production. I think, we especially members of our movement and party have to go out there and make sure that, we make this, in all sorts of languages, all sorts of manners and formulas to make this understandable to every African person out there, that we are living under a social system whose mode of production is colonialism. Because I think there's nothing else. You cannot understand anything in this world if you don't understand that colonialism is the mode of production. If you don't understand that, there's nothing that you can understand. For example, here in the township, there's a young brother who just got killed, and apparently from what they call gang violence and whatever. That cannot be understood if you don't understand that we are living under colonial domination, that colonialism is the mode of production. Because you have to understand how we ended up in the townships. Where does the township come from? There was no township before Europeans came here in Africa. And what is the purpose of a township? It's colonialism. Because colonialism, it's about what? Resources. It's about the theft of our resources. We wake up in the morning and go and work in the factories of the bourgeoisie. We wake up in the morning, we go and work in the retail stores, in the farms and whatever, to produce material value. So these things, people are aware of them, are familiar with them. We see them as part of the normal everyday life, that you wake up in the morning, you go to school, you grow up, and then you get a job. But then what is the job? Like here in South Africa right now, there's this whole discussion around Africans coming from Zimbabwe, from Malawi and Nigeria coming to South Africa, and there's a struggle around, no, they're taking our jobs. They're taking our jobs because it's cheap labor and whatever, they will take any type of job. But sorry, what is the job? What's a job? Because a job is going to give up your labor, because that's all you have now, since they took your land and everything through this process of colonialism. So all you have is your hands to go and work and produce value for the white man, so that he can live comfortably. They can have access to all these resources, and you just get enough to come back in the township. You eat to get enough energy and go and work again. And the rest of us who are in the township, who are not working, so-called, who are unemployed, we are there making sure that everyone else that's employed behaves. They accept everything, the lousy salaries and whatever, because if they don't, they'll be replaced by you, who is in the township, who is not working. And then we have to, like, the one thing that we were saying around this, we had a discussion about why this kind of horizontal violence happens in the township. And we were talking about the reason is because our resources are stolen from us on a daily basis. So we have to compete and fight one another over these crumbs, these limited, scarce resources that we are left with here. That's why we have all this violence in the township. So we have all these politicians that are making conclusions that don't conclude, like Fred Hampton said. And then we are supposed to follow them. And when we follow them, we just go through a dead end. We never get to a point where we are able to resolve anything. So I just want to express appreciation and encourage all the comrades, all the Africans, to follow up on this political theory of African internationalism and understand colonialism as a mode of production. So I know we're going to be having more discussions around the Black Revolution of the 1960s, and right now where we are as African people today, we're still fighting against the same thing. It was colonialism then, and its colonialism right now. I just want to make one more point. There's an assumption of the things that when you come to the townships, a lot of people cannot answer to why white people have all these things, and then here in the townships we have nothing. And there's an assumption of, oh, well, these are just white people have access to these things because they made them happen, but they did not make them happen. When Europeans came to Africa, they brought nothing. They didn't bring all these tall buildings, the skyscrapers. There were no cars, there was no cell phone, there was no like light bulbs. All this technology was not there. All these things begin to emerge. We can talk through cell phones like this because after African people have been snatched, enslaved, Africa partitioned, all our resources stolen from us. So all these things that you associate with white people and white civilizations emerge after we've been colonized, we've been enslaved. Right now, recently, we've been talking about, who's this brother, Jose Jaffe, who talked about white civilization, that everything they have, everything we are, we attribute to white people, and their civilization is stolen from all over the world. As they attack us everywhere, they even take our culture, they take whatever inventions that we've had. Even today, students go to universities, they invent stuff. But when they invent stuff, this goes on to contribute to the so-called white civilization. But African people don't benefit from African young people going to universities. All the skills, the technology and whatever, our labor goes to service Europeans today, not some years ago. It's something that is continuous. So it's in the fabric, the DNA of capitalism as a social system, that colonialism is really the mode of production. So I just want to salute Chairman Omali Yeshitela and this, political theory of African internationalism for helping us to understand this. Uhuru.
Uhuru.
I wanted to just in terms of to make just a couple of things clear. That Comrade Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, he lives right now in England, but he was born in Congo, and the conditions and circumstances, political circumstances created in Congo, such as what was inferred by Comrade Director Tafarie, the conditions that imposed on us is what drove him out of Congo and into France, and then into England right now. And then Comrade Tafarie is located right now in what they call South Africa, a name that was imposed on us, just like all these other names that African people find ourselves trapped with, stuck with, because of an imposition of colonialism, the white domination of Africa and African people. And I wanted to mention this because I was having a discussion just yesterday, and I was trying to explain to someone who was involved in political activity, and that they think that the African People's Socialist Party should be involved in this too, because we're all doing the same thing. And I was explaining how the party exists throughout the world, that we are in Africa and that we are in Europe and that we are in these places. But the person couldn't understand me because much of what they come to understand about the world is what has been taught by Marx and Marxists, I should say. And so when I talked about African internationalism, when I talked about the party existing all those places, what this comrade was hearing incorrectly was I was saying, like other organizations might say, that we have a relationship with Africans over here or with people over there. They were hearing something different, because the African People's Socialist Party has come to an understanding that we are Africans dispersed, forcibly dispersed, separated from around the world, and that the world owes its existing political and economic configuration to that process. That's what we talk about. We talk about a mode of production. And that as a party, we have assumed the responsibility ourselves. That is to say, we have it in our own hands, not just to establish relationships with Africans in different places. That's Pan-Africanism. We're not Pan-Africanists. We've assumed for ourselves the responsibility to destroy the social system, to take power. And so an instrument for taking power as part of this process, we exist as a single organization. As a single organization, we exist throughout the continent of Africa. We exist in the Caribbean. We exist throughout the Americas and Europe, not as individual groups or organizations with the relationship to each other who sympathize politically with each other, but as a part of a single organization. Because we've come to understand that African people are dominated by a single process. There's a world economy that has come into existence that we refer to as a colonial mode of production. And it requires the separation of Africa and African people for its continuing existence. And that history, progress, real progress in human history is that movement toward the destruction of oppression of peoples, and that African internationalism and the African People's Socialist Party, which makes it concrete and alive, we have assumed the responsibility to change it, transform it, not wish for it to happen, not hope that this relationship or that relationship will make it happen, but to establish relationships ourselves as a party based on a recognition of the core contradiction that unites, first of all, Africa and African people to each other, core contradiction, and that this contradiction is responsible for the misery that's being experienced in Africa and by African people globally. If we're catching hell in the Caribbean, if we're catching hell in North St. Louis in the United States, if we're catching hell in some place in Europe, it is a consequence of the attack that was made on Africa. And the capture of Africa and African people, we have the contradictions of Africa and African people have been transferred to all these other places around the world. I'm sitting right now at this very moment in St. Louis, North St. Louis, because of an assault that was made on Africa 600 years ago. And that this thing is not going to be over by my trying to make things just only better in St. Louis. The betterment that I fight for in St. Louis should be leading to the destruction of the social system and the total liberation and unification of Africa and African people around the world. That's what the party is conscious of. That's why people are joining the African People's Socialist Party, recognizing the significance, the necessity to join the African People's Socialist Party, because that's the continuum we've been on for the longest period of time. Comrade Director, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, and I really want to also just appreciate Secretary General Luwezi, Kinshasa, and Director Tafarie. Just been here taking notes, and hopefully with some of what I say also helps to generate more discussion around this. I want to just unite with everything that's been put forward, and just to say that when Comrade Director Tafarie was talking, it just really highlighted for me the conditions of Africans everywhere is indicative of the fact that African people, we are a globally dispersed, colonized nation, because Director Tafarie is talking about situations that's happening in occupied Azania, which are, things that Africans everywhere in the US, we are experiencing. It's the same thing. And, if we don't understand colonialism as the mode of production and as the fundamental problem, we can't even connect these really important dots and connect ourselves to one another. So I thought that was really important. And I think when we talk about colonialism as the mode of production and this breakthrough that has been, presented through your leadership, Chairman, and the work of the party, over the last 50 years, when we just look at, because it was, being talked about, like some of the explanations and justifications for our conditions and how it just doesn't satisfy what's real, what people are seeing in the real world. Colonial capitalism is no longer able to explain itself to people. People are able to see right through it. And that's because of African internationalism. That's because of your intervention in this whole process and presenting the worldview of the African working class, which has just allowed us to see the world as it actually is, versus how colonial capitalism has projected it to be to the rest of the world. Yes.
Yeah, this is responsible. This is why we find Africans who refer to themselves as Black leftists, Black Marxists, or something to that effect. This is an attempt to find something progressive about being colonized. The fact is that we are not Black leftists. What are you talking about, leftists and things like that? To be a Black Marxist is to ascribe to somebody else's history, somebody else's definition of reality. And the left and right and center characterizations that's given to, even stemming, I think, out of French Parliament, something like that. Someone's left the right. But the fact is that France itself is one of the most significant creations of colonialism, the colonial mode of production. I think that's extremely important. How can you be a Black leftist? I'm not trying to perfect this thing they have. I'm trying to overturn the left, the right, the reactionary, the conservative, the liberals, all of that dominates Africa. That's colonialism sitting on a platform of the oppression and exploitation. You can't come to that conclusion until you break free from it. And you break free from it, then you willingly, consciously engage in making your own history, not somebody else's history, by being a Black this or Black that. That's a part of who they are. Our objective is not to become a part of who they are, not to be a Black American or Afro-German or something to that extent, but to overturn this hyphen, destroy this hyphen, and then make it necessary for white people to make their own living. We are the lifeboats. We are the forces, the thing that gives them existence. Go get a job like everybody else has had to work for a living. That's what we're telling the white world, that you have to go for yourself now. You steal our culture, stealing everything. France is recognized as the great French cuisine. Where does this cuisine come from? Where does all of this stuff come from except what they steal from Africa and other colonized peoples of the world? So it's the colonized people of the world who had better be able to come to each other. Africa and other colonial subjects have to come onto our own. That's the way we destroyed this social system. And it should be clear to anybody who's hearing this discussion and the colonizers, white people who love us, the white people, what's the word for that Comrade Sobukwe said, Comrade Tafarie, the white people who love us?
Abelunga Tandai.
Yeah, the white people who love us, the people who ride our backs, and they hate the suffering that we experience and talk about it all the time. Oh, you're treated so badly, but they won't get off our backs. And this is the basis of our suffering. So the white people who love us, they can see this. Now they need to be able to see this, and they do. Then they start fighting for Black power, which is what will destroy the oppressive, negative, freedom negating white power. Uhuru.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, word, Chairman. Definitely unite with this profound intervention just made. The white people of us. Yeah, that's that's incredible. Something we experience all the time.
That's Mangaliso Sobukwe. That's Robert Mangaliso Sobukwe, the white people who love us.
Yeah, I think we need to have that writing. Maybe we can make a poster out of that. Yeah. I just want to say
that poster, Comrade Secretary General, that poster should be right next to the one that says Kupete Bulekai.
Oh, right, definitely. That's the cultural revolution, Chairman. Yes, word, Chairman. I just want to say we are in terms of the policies to drive a wedge between African workers that, like we see in South Africa, it's not like an accident. It's deliberate. Between elections, South Africa, some Africans from somewhere else will be attacked by Africans, from somewhere. They be doing it even before the deal they made with the settlers. Before Mandela was released from prison.
Comrade Secretary General, can you make that clear for people who may not be a part of discussions that we have on the regular? What do you mean you say between elections, can you just say more about that?
After the so-called end of apartheid, they organized, worldwide publicized elections in South Africa to validate the power of the ANC, the fact that the white power transferred the administration of South Africa to the ANC. You know, Chairman talks about how Bill Clinton sent his team, you know, his best advisor to go to South Africa so they can make sure the plan is all upset by anybody else. And as you know, the ANC came out with over 90% of elections. They won power. But every 4 years or 5 years, there are elections in South Africa, and it's always won by ANC, and the power of ANC is dwindling, is going down. But between elections, particularly when elections are about to be organized, there is always organized violence in the townships, so that the workers basically, instead of discussing the real issues, to mobilize workers to stand up against the ANC policies. Now, the only thing the workers are concerned about, save your own lives, because there is no space to discuss the real issues, because the ANC and the ruling class, they have imposed violence. They released the forces in Counter Freedom Party and the other groups. They create chaos. And you have no time, you know, basically to think about what you do next time. Just, you know, look for safety. And these, before even we hear about violence being organized against Africans who are not from South Africa. So it's the same thing. The only innovation is not now just violence between African working class from South Africa. Now they added something new, is violence between so-called Africans from South Africa and Africans from outside. And these type of horizontal violence that does not target the real enemy, is just basically the African workers killing ourselves, and therefore we can't move our struggle forward, and we became the problems, because we can't say anymore the problem is the ruling class. We start saying the problem is our neighbors, you know, basically just like they do it in the neighborhood in London or in the US, you know, organizing horizontal violence amongst the people. So what I want to say about that is that, number one, the wealth stolen from Africans in South Africa is concentrated in the hands of the settlers. ANC has got share access to some of it, but it's within the settler population. And the vast majority of the wealth stolen from South Africa is in England, is in Germany, is in Japan, is in the US and Canada and around the world. So the workers coming from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, they are poor workers whose wealth have been stolen by the same people who have stolen our wealth in South Africa in the first place. And also, there is an agreement between the African petit bourgeoisie in South Africa and the African petit bourgeoisie outside South Africa. In the past, if you stole money in Africa, you are from like, let's say, Congo or Senegal, Nigeria, all your wealth are transferred to safe place, England, Belgium. No, now what they do? They bring it also to South Africa. So you go to South Africa, you will see all the millionaires from Nigeria, from Congo, from Senegal, from Guinea, they're all there. So what needs to happen? We need to intensify our political work with our workers, with the working class, basically, to see their mission, that they have to unify the African working class struggle against the African petit bourgeoisie from South Africa and from outside South Africa. Because these two factions, African petit bourgeoisie, they're united, and the evidence is in the wealth stored in South Africa. And also this question of the struggle in South Africa, which needs the unification of the African working class. We have a concrete example. Look at what's going on in Ukraine. You see the attempt to unify the white nation against Russia. Every day you hear news. Belgium had sent this. England had sent this. Celebrities from England, from France, they're sending stuff. So there is no border between England. England left EU. But there is no border when it comes to going to Ukraine. They're all united there. So we also need our own movement without borders, but led by the African working class. So the struggle, the contradiction is happening in South Africa. Not only we need to address the Africans from South Africa, but the Africans from outside South Africa too. that this is the struggle to unify the African workers from everywhere so we can go on the offensive. Even in South Africa, we might stand better chances to go to capture state power than maybe in Zimbabwe. I don't know, but all these realities depend on the work basically we're going to do. And the other thing is the question of colonialism as a global mode of protection. The significance of African struggle, African revolution is just huge. We know after the end of when the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States and the other white power leaders celebrated. Now they have a unipolar world. They can dominate, but it didn't work like that. We know Russia and China demanding multipolar world, but what the Africans are demanding? That's the question. The world is in crisis, and the crisis is severe. Because this crisis is severe, it means Africa and African people everywhere, we should be definitely the most concerned because we don't have power yet, and the world is being reorganized somehow, and it will be reorganized at the expense of those who don't have power. So the question of struggle against colonialism as a global mode of protection should be grasped by every single African and begin to demand black power. And that's why the title, even though this program today, begins with the question of black power. So this is a fundamental question. We want a world without colonialism as a mode of protection, and that should be the basis for everybody. We want to see a better world, but it doesn't mean because we're saying it, people will move like that. We need to act with power. We need to act as one. We need to mobilize black people everywhere. It's our time now. It's time for movement for black power everywhere, and this should dominate, should permeate all the discussion. What discussion you're having? You're conscious about what? So if your conscience is not determined by the necessity for us to have power, just anything else will not do. The world is in such a crisis. You heard Chairman saying that often, all the time now. The time is really now for Africans to begin to say, yes, I'm down with power. I'm down with African Peace Society Party. I'm going to join. I'm going to follow Chairman and myself today. Things like that. That's where we are today. This is where the discussion will be. And this program is to facilitate what is permissible, and what is not permissible today in the black community anywhere on the planet. That's basically the significance of that. So I just profoundly enjoy this program because it puts us on a place where all the powers are now, because they're all concerned how to protect their interests, on how to change this world, and we too are part of it, but we are not yet in power yet. So that's why you should make it a reality by joining today. Do whatever it needs to be done so we can be there.
Comrade Secretary General, if I may, Comrade Director, I think it's a really important discussion that we're having right now. And Comrade Secretary General mentioned how China and Russia, really pushing for a multipolar world as opposed to a unipolar world. Unipolar world, of course, is something that is how the world was defined after the collapse of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union used to be this major contender with the United States for power in the world, for defining the world and which direction the world was going to be moving in. And so when you see Russia and you see China, they're talking about a multipolar world as opposed to a unipolar world. They talk about a world where the United States is not the dominant force in the world, and other forces in the world can also share the power of the world. And I think our view is different. And while we recognize and perhaps even for some tactical reason can unite with the notion of undermining the singular, the hegemony of the United States that is suggested by the notion of a multipolar world, our objective is to destroy, make it clear. We're not trying to find a way to live within this colonial mode of production. Our struggle is to destroy it. And so, we hear people, Marxists and so-called communists and revolutionaries who have talked about the workers of the world, having power. The African Revolution is the only revolution that must result in power going to the working class. The African Revolution is global. It is not an Italian revolution. It is not a Jamaican revolution. It is an African revolution. It is global. It has been made global by the assault on Africa that began 600 years ago and the forced dispersal of African people around the world. The African nation has been forcibly dispersed. And the process of making this revolution is part of a process of struggling against the bourgeois nation. The bourgeois nation was something that was given birth through the colonial mode of production. It is colonialism. It is colonial slavery that gave rise to what is recognized today as the nation. Those nations are something that's been defined as a part of the consequences of Europe consolidating itself through slavery and colonialism. And the struggle of African people must necessarily result in the existence of the development or the thrusting into history a proletarian nation, a nation of the working class. This working class dispersed around the globe, engaged in a single trajectory, a single revolutionary movement under a single revolutionary leadership of the African People's Socialist Party. That's what we're fighting for. This pulls it all together. And so the objective is we can say workers of the world finally can be united to make this revolutionary struggle. The proletariat revolution is consolidated in the struggle of African people who have been forcibly dispersed. Africa, first workers, all of our resources creates capitalism, first capital. African people ourselves, first capital, first working class that emerged through this process, African workers. The Africans of the world, the proletariat of the world, workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose, as Marx might have said, but your change. That's an explicit statement that's being made, should be made to Africa and African people. That's what we understand. We have confidently stepped into history to seize control of the process of history being made. Conscious participants in developing this history. A people and a party that has come to recognize necessity, which has been characterized by some as real freedom is the recognition of necessity. And necessity requires this, the development of human society, the movement forward of human progress requires the absolute total destruction of the colonial mode of production so that human beings can enter into decent relationships without this intervention by oppression and exploitation that has come about 600 years ago as in this current iteration. The contradictions, as we know, existed in the world before, especially in Europe. But the current iteration, the world that we are struggling with today, is one that has achieved its political and its economic configuration and definition through colonialism, the colonial mode of production. So I think it's important. And then when we talk about what has been taken from African people on the continent, when we talk about what's been taken from us in South Africa and stolen from Malawi and stolen from Zimbabwe, one thing that we have to recognize, one of the most critical things stolen is our identities, which is why we are Malawians and Zimbabweans and South Africans in the first damn place. Without that intervention by Europe and colonialism, people who are related to each other, almost immediately and directly. I don't even know people in the Caribbean and other places in Africa who carry the same bloodline related to us because of colonial intervention. So we find ourselves fighting each other under these names given to us by white power, white people who lord it over us, humiliate us on a regular basis. Join the African People's Socialist Party. Become a part of the process of rescuing humanity from this horrible situation that has been created for us. And the difficulty that most of us have is that we have accepted the definition of human reality, of the definition of the world that has been imposed on us by colonialism. That there's no reason. So the how is it? The Zimbabweans taking our jobs. Here we are on stolen land in what is characterized as the United States today. Stolen land, stolen people, enslaved people all over. And we have this crazy struggle. The Africans, of course, the Mexicans are taking our job. When half of Mexico was stolen by the same people who stole me. How the hell can, the Mexican take your job? You don't have a damn job. They got a job and they employ you with more or less resources that you try to survive off. In most instances, you can't survive off it, which is why someone come at Tafarie talk about the horizontal violence and everything that happens among us and between us and other colonized people, the same enemy that has identified us and defined us for his benefit has us now at war with each other because we don't understand the source of the contradiction, the basis of our starvation, the basis of the identity that has been imposed on us through colonialism. Well, that's what African internationalism overturns. That's what the African People's Socialist Party is engaged in dealing with. That's why we have to say our job is to make the working class the new ruling class, and the African People's Socialist Party has assumed the responsibility of taking power, of putting in place the new government of African people around the world, and as a part of the process of destroying the existing social system. Concretely, that's what it means. It means we're taking the guesswork out of it. We're not somebody who just want to protest how horrible colonialism is, the bad white man is, and how they take all of our dances and all this kind of stuff, and they do all of that. But we are saying that we are taking it back. And that every organizer, everyone who comes into the African People's Socialist Party has been deployed in this mission, again, for the absolute unconditional liberation and unification of Africa and African people globally. We won't be satisfied with anything else. Don't tell me I should be fighting against fascism. Don't tell me I should be fighting against racism. I'm fighting to overturn the entire pedestal upon which fascism and racism exists. The overturning the whole social system. I'm not a black leftist. I'm an African revolutionary, anti-colonialist revolutionary and African internationalist. That's what it is that we have to be about. So, and I think that also, I've heard people talking about Ukraine and Russia, and they use what they characterize as some Leninist position about how, what we're looking at, they would say is two bourgeoisie on both sides fighting, and that the workers have to be just united with the workers against the bourgeoisie. And they want to, what we are saying is that what happens with Africa and African people, the violence that's just been discussed, the so-called ethnic or so-called tribal violence. This is something like what you might characterize as international violence within the nation itself that we have to deal with in order to move the nation forward. And that when we can talk about the workers in what is characterized as Zimbabwe being able to unite with the workers in Malawi or the workers in South Africa to overturn this, because we are destroying all of all of the factors that keep us separated as working people and liberating our Africa. That's one thing. And we can unite with that. We say if African is fighting in Ethiopia against other Africans based on some kind of ethnic stuff that has been contrived and placed on us, we say that Africans should turn their guns against the ruling class in every one of those issues, against the petty bourgeoisie who's got them on a mission. Every time an election is coming up, they find a way to get us fighting each other. We say, no, don't do that. The workers must turn their guns against those who are in power and representing white power in those places. That's one thing. But when you look at Russia and Ukraine, that's an entirely different thing. Because what we see in Ukraine is that the bourgeoisie that came into existence, white power that came into existence through colonial slavery, is attempting to extend its reach. Because Russia did not come into existence through colonial slavery, but England did. France did, Belgium did. All of these countries have suddenly decided that they want to protect civilization and democracy, are using Ukraine as a place, as an instrument to attack Russia that did not come into existence that way. And then there are these other countries who used to be part of what they call the Soviet Union or Eastern Europe that were left out of the resources that the rest of Europe was getting from colonial slavery. They couldn't participate, partially because they were part of the Soviet bloc, partially, and the US and the rest of the slave owners countries were starving Russia because it refused to be a part of their game. And so you got some of these countries, people in these countries. I remember, Comrade Secretary General, Comrade Director, watching these poor Europeans who were breaking free from Soviet oppression. I've never seen such poor immigrants, such rich immigrants, fur coats, leather coats, and all of this stuff, on riding trains, right, to escape. Look at what we see in Africa and other places. When you talk about an immigrant, they weren't in cages. Like the Mexicans are thrust in cages at the borders here. They weren't in cages like the Africans from Haiti are thrust in borders here in the United States. These were affluent people. They were not as affluent as the rest of the white people. And what they were fighting for to get rid from Russia was to join the rest of the white world that was eating the flesh of Black people and oppressed peoples around the world. I have no sympathy for the so-called Ukrainians. Those who willingly, I'm talking about those who willingly participate in the attack on Russia. And for the purpose of extending the white power colonial domination throughout the whole of Europe and dominating all of us. There's much more that can be said about this, and we will see it in the coming days, weeks, and months ahead. But I just think it's really important to clarify that, Comrade Director, and I know that we don't have that much time, but I know that there's some places that you want to go with this discussion that I've sort of disrupted. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, I gotta say, I love where it's going though. So it's a really profound discussion, and want for Secretary General Luwezi and Director Tafarie to be able to contribute to even what you just laid out there. But I do want to make sure that we extend this discussion as far and wide as possible. So just want to kind of stop right here, pause right here for a moment, and just also add that when we look at the colonial mode of production, we can understand the world's struggles, and it's so clarifying and concrete that once we know this and understand the world this way, there's no way we can accept anything less than African freedom. We cannot accept our present conditions, and we have to join the African Revolution. Like, I don't know how anybody leaves this discussion and doesn't make that decision. But as mentioned, so we're going to take a pause right here because I want to make sure this study is being shared widely. So we're going to take a share break for these next couple of minutes while I go through some announcements and our esteemed panelists prepare to answer some audience questions. I need you, our live viewers, to share this live stream right now. Like this video, tag a friend, and share. They say the devil works hard while Mark Zuckerberg works harder to make sure that we cannot utilize these platforms in our own interests. So Facebook, all of these platforms do not belong to us. They continue to increase the censorship of the ability of Africans to be able to communicate with one another, these profound ideas which will contribute to our liberation. So we have to outwork them and use these platforms to the extent possible. So that means that we have to work extremely hard. And right now, what's in the interest of Africans everywhere is to understand the colonial mode of production. That is in our immediate interest, is to understand the colonial mode of production, because we understand ourselves, we understand our significance, we understand Europe's dependence on African, on the colonial domination of Africa and African people. We can understand ourselves differently than how we've been perceived and projected for 600 years by European definition. This is how we've understood ourselves and how the world has understood us. And we, through the process of African internationalism, and helping us to understand colonialism as a mode of production, we can negate all of that and to, as Chairman says, assert ourselves, to assume our rightful place in making this history. And and struggling for the freedom of African people. So it's what's in our interest. So African people have to be, made aware of this discussion, be brought into this process. And the African People's Socialist Party is the only one that's having this discussion. The African People's Social Party is the only one that's having this discussion, the only one that's assumed this responsibility. And so that's why we must share this live stream right now. So if you haven't done it yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. You know how easy it is. Go ahead on your phone, your mobile, your iPad, wherever you're viewing from right now, and hit that share button. I want to see these shares go up. And you can even comment in the chat that you shared so that I know it's being done, and inspire those who are watching with you to share as well. So type shared into the comment section once you've done it. You guys are connected to, or many of you are connected to, different groups and different pages. Share to those groups, share to those pages. Again, we want to get this as far out and wide as possible. By the time that we're done with announcements, we need to have reached a minimum of 500 shares. And I know that we can do that because all of you stretched across our different platforms right now watching us can participate in sharing this live stream. So comment shared in the chat section, along with your questions, along with tagging people into this discussion. Go ahead and share, and let's get these shares up to 500 at minimum before we conclude our announcements today. So with that, let's go ahead and get into our announcements. So you guys can simultaneously do both. Go ahead and share. And like I said, just keep an ear out because I'm about to tell you some really important things coming up within the next couple of days and months. So join the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations in our 6th annual electoral campaign school, scheduled for next Saturday and Sunday, April 9th and 10th. Everyone with an interest in extending the struggle for African liberation must attend this important school. The school will not only instruct attendees on how to run for office, but they will also learn how to get issues like reparations and community control of police and education on local ballots. There will also be instructions on how to initiate recalls to remove opponents of our freedom from office, Black, white, or otherwise. In the past, the methods of struggle for liberation of our people have been posed as either the ballot or the bullet. This period demands we be able to redefine the struggles as one using every method, the ballot and the bullet. So for more information and to register, visit blackisbackcoalition.org. Next, come to the Black Mothers March on the White House Sunday, May 8th in Washington, D.C., deepening the resistance to the terror of child protection services and calling for Black community control of child protection. The event is organized by a coalition of Black-led organizations, including the African National Women's Organization, that have been involved in the struggle to rescue our children from the custody of the colonial state. For more information and to register, visit blackmothersmarch.com. Next, mark your calendars for African Liberation Day, taking place May 28th and 29th, and featuring festivals and conferences in cities across the world. This year's African Liberation Day events will recognize the founding of the African People's Socialist Party in 1972, themed Relentless 50 Years of Leadership Toward African Redemption. Learn more about your region's ALD festivities at alduhuru.org. Next. And make sure you like and subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study, and support the Omali Taught Me show by donating at paypal.me/OmaliTaughtMe. And I'm just going to reemphasize again, you can also support this show by sharing. So I'm hoping those shares went up, hoping you guys commented in the chat section. I'll check in just a moment that you guys are sharing the study, support this powerful information, these incredible panelists, and get this message out to African workers of the world who need to hear this, message so that they can be connected to their own revolutionary party and that they can join the African Revolution. All right, so we can go ahead and take the PowerPoint down. I'll take the announcements down because I just want to, from that last point, really call on you. If you're listening to this and you are understanding what's being stated and you see the situation in the world and know that this cannot go on anymore, that we have a responsibility in this struggle. When we talk about fronts of the African Revolution, no matter where it is that you're located, you have to become a part of that front of the African Revolution. If you're located in Europe, in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Australia, in the US, we have to join that front of the African Revolution. We can't run away to any magical place where the conditions will be any different for African people. We are a globally dispersed, colonized nation, and that means we have to join the struggle to overthrow colonialism, overthrow the colonial mode of production, cut off the lifeline, the blood-sucking parasite off the body of Africa and African people everywhere, free up humanity by destroying the system of colonial capitalism. And we can do that by joining the African People's Socialist Party. The revolutionary vehicle exists, the Black Power movement that they sought to defeat and snuff out and make sure that it can never rear its head exists and is alive today based on the leadership of Chairman Omali Yeshitela and the existence of the African People's Socialist Party. You can be a part of that. Go to apspuhuru.org, fill out our contact form, and our members will be in touch with you so you can join in this process. Join the African People's Socialist Party. That's the only solution to anything that we're discussing, any contradiction. The African People's Socialist Party is paving the way for a future shorn of colonial capitalism. So I just wanted to say that, wrap up these announcements. Again, call on you to share this discussion far and wide, because if it's changing your life, then it needs to change somebody else's life as well. So I want to go ahead and bring back up our panelists, Chairman Omali Yeshitela, and the African Socialist International Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa, ASI African Region Director Tafarie Mugeri, as we're discussing colonialism as the mode of production, Black Power, and the US front of the African Revolution. So Chairman, I'm going to move now to some questions, unless there is any reason why I should not, then I'll go ahead and take some audio.
I do want to make a couple of comments.
Yeah.
One, it's so important because people get born into situations and with the assumption that it's always been like this. You just get born into a world. And there's an assumption that comes with that the world has always been like this. And the fact of the matter is that the way history is interpreted now, it's from the colonizer. And that interpretation of history is deep, even in the roots of the most remote areas in the continent of Africa itself. That this is the history, and so we're saying that what has happened under this mode of production is that the arrival of white people in history has been characterized as the beginning of history. Everybody who is in this study, this meeting today, that's how we've been taught history. That the arrival of white people in history is sort of like the beginning of history. And of course, that's just such a horrible, abject, lie. I mean, if you look at Africa, and not just Africa, which is crucial, but to look at Japan and India and Cambodia and all these other places around the world where you can find evidence. You look at the indigenous people and our people in Australia and these other places. I mean, white people are newcomers to history. And somebody coming at Tafarie was talking about how the wealth that white people have accumulated is not due to their genius, but to the labor and the resources of Africa and African people. That's where it came from. But not just the land and not just the labor, but also the technology of Africa and African people is something that has also been colonized and recharacterized and redefined. And so, I mean, there was a conscious move by colonial slavers to kidnap Africans in certain parts of Africa because of various technology that was there, agricultural and otherwise, is bring those Africans. If there's rice growing in production in the United States, in the Carolinas and things like that in the United States, it's because the Africans were targeted in certain parts of Africa, particularly West Africa, particularly in this territory now known as Sierra Leone, kidnap, bring them there so that they can get this benefit. And there are other things too that you can look at in terms of technology. So yeah, they wanted the labor and they wanted the land, but they also wanted the technology that they were stealing from us. I think it's important to understand that. And also, I just want to say, Comrade Director, that some of the discussions that we have with some people, and they hear what the party says is a certain kind of braggadocio, and you're saying that you're the only ones who understand. Yes. Are you saying that this is the correct line? We say yes, but not just because we say it, because of what we stand for philosophically is made manifest in a material way. When we look at the various institutions and the various kind of organizations, committees that the party has established throughout the world, this is a material manifestation of African internationalism. Not just someone had a good idea, it's a material manifestation that African internationalism, the theory that I've worked on, that I've developed, laid the foundation for the existence of a Black Power blueprint, the existence that's a phenomenon in terms of what is creating and changing the lives of African people materially, concretely. The existence of these various other committees and organizations, that's the material manifestation of African internationalism. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of people have different ideas in different places around the world and different things about how you can do this economically, but pulling it all together and a philosophy that unites, and then creating organization that unites Africa and African people in this process, that is a process that not only brings something to us, but negates the power and influence ideologically, politically, organizationally, materially of colonialism. That's the difference that we are talking about. So I just wanted to say that, Comrade Akile, please proceed.
Chairman. So we're going to go ahead and take some questions from our live audience. And also we're going to take a look at the locations where people have checked in with us. We have Wichita, Kansas, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, St. Louis, Missouri, San Diego, California, St. Petersburg, Florida, Fresno, California, Largo, Florida, Oakland, California, Harlem, New York, Columbia, Missouri, Brooklyn, New York, Marion County, Georgia, Tampa, Florida, Occupied Azania, Montreal, Canada, Los Angeles, California, Portland, Oregon, Huntsville, Alabama, Jamaica, and Leicester, England. So, Huru comrades, thank you for tuning in.
I think that's Leicester. Is that Leicester, Comrade Luwezi? England?
Yeah, it's in England. Chester is in England, yeah.
It's Leicester, though, isn't it?
No, you got Chester and Leicester and Manchester. Chester is next to Manchester.
Oh, Manchester and Leicester, yeah, okay.
All right, threw me for a loop there. All right, so so this question slash comment is coming. This first one came from Comrade Mwezi in San Diego, California. So it's a long comment slash question. So she says, I often run into many Africans who are dead set on the belief that our conditions are because of our minds, that we have to change our minds slash thoughts. I understand this as the ideological slash philosophical imperialism at its finest, because the genuine analysis of the colonial mentality is not understood. But my comment is really about how African internationalism has the power to change our minds, but also the conditions that cause this cognitive dissonance in the first place. I think it's so important to call this a colonial democracy versus democracy in general, because human beings have always had ideas and deferring ideas in general. We see both the positive and negative consequences of having differing ideas in feudal Europe, Christendom, where this meant death and torture for some and tyrannical execution of power for others, i.e. the church. When we say colonial democracy, we can see that because the social system, that is colonialism as a mode of production, was slash does exist, it allows the platform and vehicle for deferring sectors of the white population to coexist with their deferring ideas at the expense of African and all colonized peoples of the world. So our question earlier, Secretary General Luwezi raised that we are fighting for an anti-colonial democracy. Can our panelists speak to what an anti-colonial democracy looks like for African people and peoples of the world? It is clear that the party ASI is a historical and present day example of what self-governing looks like for anti-colonial democracy, which is socialism, and that's the question. So let me know if I need to repeat that last part.
Yes, for this contribution. Basically, you heard Chairman talking about the necessity for us to destroy the colonialism as a global mode of production. We're not looking for for multipolar world or something like that. But our position, our unique relationship with global colonialism as the starting point requires us to destroy it. So we do have slogans like African self-determination is the highest expression of democracy. And when we show these things, you go take them into consideration for other things. We do say to differentiate ourselves from the petit bourgeoisie, also from the bourgeoisie itself. Because the bourgeoisie talks about democracy all the time. But when we say we fight for democracy, we're fighting for to be the only one who is control for our destiny, our community. Anything that happens in our community has to happen under the leadership of the African working class, under the leadership of the African people. So, and we recognize that the democracy we're fighting for will deny space, any space, to the power of the colonizers, because democracy is not just what people are being told. That is the way you vote, you say what you want to say and things like that. Democracy is anti-colonial. So basically it negates the power of colonizers, the programs of the colonizers, and replace them with our own programs, the programs that speak to the need, to the aspirations, to the needs of the African working class. But we also recognize, as we fight for democracy, we do recognize this special relationship we have, that colonialism is a global mode of production. It's not just happening in one place. It's happening, everything's connected. Everything, every economic activity is connected, and everything depends on that colonialism being the starting point, and Africa being a key strategic part of it. So we recognize that. That's why we say we want to build a United States of Africa under the leadership of African working class, and a successful revolution to build a United States of Africa will also bring down the whole edifice. So you will not have to choose between anti-colonial democracy and the bourgeois democracy, because the bourgeoisie will not have no other possibility to exist. It has to disappear. A successful African revolution is also part of the collapse, basically disappears of the bourgeoisie, not just as a nation. The bourgeois nation will disappear, but you will not have what we call today bourgeois democracy, because African working class coming to power, it means black power being real, and black power being real, being in the form of state power, basically. The United States of Africa being established, it cannot coexist with the existence of capitalism as the United States we know, as France we know, because they will not have a basis to stand on. And this basically differentiates us when we say anti-colonial democracy versus bourgeois democracy, because bourgeois democracy is what we know is a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie over the colonized people, because the bourgeois democracy is something that white people experience. In sometimes the crisis, it might come under threat. That's why you heard this word of fascism, things like that. But for us African people, is dictatorship. That's why we are, we're calling everyone basically to stop referring to the United States and France, from what they say of themselves, what they think of themselves, what they want the world to think of themselves. We want the world to think what the African working class is thinking, because the African working class cannot tell lies, cannot, everything we say has to be based on the truth. And what we're experiencing is dictatorship. Everything they do, the power of Joe Biden is dictatorship. The power of Boris Johnson is dictatorship. Everything they do is dictatorship, because the will of the African working class is not exercised nowhere apart from in African People's Socialist Party. And this is what we need to complete. So yeah, I'll stop here. I'm sure we're going to hear from the chairman. So that's what I can contribute to. Or
Uhuru. Yeah, Uhuru, can I go first just to before the chairman speaks? Yeah, Uhuru. I just want to say, Chairman, regarding this, I think this whole question be tied to almost everything that has been said. just before this section of of question and answers. I think we really need to know like what we're fighting for. That question has not been answered and is never answered to the working class. It's always about jobs. Like maybe water, houses, and whatever. Just to survive within this whole social system in the same conditions and whatever. But we don't talk about what we're fighting for. Like we have to get the end. I think part of what we're doing here is also answering the question of what we're fighting against. We're fighting against this whole social system of the colonial mode of production. So I think that's really profound. And the question that has been asked by comrade Odam, I think it's really important for us to be able to answer that, because right now we are told that we are living under some democracies, and even in Ukraine they're saying that they're defending democracy and all this type of stuff. But when you look at the majority of people in the world, or even in South Africa or anywhere else, like people are poor, and like they don't have water. People are suffering, and they say they have democracies. But if democracy has to do about people making decisions in the world, how can people make decisions against themselves, the decisions that go against their own interest? And I think that part of it is that because they use this whole electoral system as as proof to say is the will of the people, because the people voted for the ANC, so they agree with whatever the ANC says. But people don't look at the fact that African people are colonized, and part of being colonized is the fact that we don't have our own philosophy. Like we are deprived of education and whatever. You have all this bombardment in terms of media, suggestions of like our opinions. Like if you go around the streets here and ask people, what do you think about, like right now, what do you think about people coming from Zimbabwe or Malawi or whatever? The opinion is going to be the opinion of the petty bourgeoisie. We never get time to really think through what is it that what is it that is like constitutes our class interest. What is the class interest of the African working class? We cannot be voting for it's like 27 years now or 28 years, the ANC in power, and all the time you can see these guys getting richer and richer, because they're making deals with the white men, and the African working class, the mass of the people are suffering in the townships, and yet they call it democracy just on the virtue on the basis that we voted for the ANC to be in power. So that cannot, that's the bourgeois democracy that the SG has been referring to. And so it has to show, if there is democracy, it's gonna show. I mean, the type of democracy we're fighting for is going to show in the lives of African people, the lives of the oppressed getting transformed, us, like crushing the bourgeoisie and owning and controlling the means of production, the resources. It has to show. So it's evident everywhere that the type of democracy that we have, if it's democracy, it's against our interests. So yeah, that's just my submission based on in terms of this question, Uhuru.
Uhuru, yeah, I really appreciate this discussion and these incredible contributions made by Comrade Secretary General Luwezi and Director Tafarie, and I appreciate the question that Mwezi has raised, because it is, as Comrade Tafarie has just said, a critical issue, a critical question. But what I would like for us to do, while considering everything that's been said, because I think that the clear evidence of how this thing that they characterize as democracy works for or against us, is to look at this whole issue of the state. It's a really important question, because when you talk about democracy, what you're talking about is the form of the state. You're not talking about the essence of the society at all. I mean, apartheid was the form of the state. And segregation in the United States, a form of the state. Fascism, a form of the state. Democracy, a form of the state. It has, you can have a situation where capitalism continues to exist under fascism. Doesn't say anything about the content or the character of the society itself. It's just talk about the form of the state. And the same thing is true in South Africa. What South Africa had apartheid. Wow, whoa, apartheid is so horrible. Fight against apartheid. That's why we got the same situation in South Africa today that we had when the white man was directly in control, because we're just fighting against the form of the state, not the content of the society itself. So what we are dealing with is more than just the form of the state. We recognize, as has been said by comrades Tafarie and Luwezi, that colonialism has intervened in the whole world. And that when you look at colonialism, let me just say this quickly, if I may. The form of the state was different under feudalism, of European feudalism, than under European capitalism. The state has been there forever, especially sharply defined, sharply characterized in Europe, with like I said, very sharply. And what happened is, with the movement from feudalism to capitalism, the form of the state changed considerably. And the state itself became different, because now, instead of the state being just something primarily dealing with the feudal entities, fiefdoms throughout Europe, now this thing that we call the state has expanded, and it now controls the world. That's what colonialism is. It hooked the world up into a single system. And so what we characterize as a state now is a colonial state. And it's something that, by the way, begins to offer more freedom for Europeans. You see more Europeans, destruction of feudalism, the more freedom for Europeans now because of colonialism. It brings resources, it brings a lack of the kind of scarcity that helped to define the content of the social systems inside these entities that used to be called Europe. And now the form of the state has dramatically has changed. The state itself has dramatically changed. And so the truth is that, even during apartheid, even with Israel, they call it a democracy. Killing, stealing the land of the Palestinian Arabs. The same thing with South Africa was a democracy. It was considered a part of the West, et cetera, right there in the heart of Africa. So again, we were opposed to, yes, we're fighting against democracy. Let's be quite clear about that. Let all of the reactionaries who want to slander us and say they're fighting against democracy, damn right, we're fighting against democracy. Because this is a colonial democracy. That's part of what made it necessary for the party to conclude that for the colonized, the highest expression of democracy is what? Self-determination. Because self-determination is an assault on colonial democracy, on the democracy that's imposed on us by the colonizer. You see what we're saying? The colonizer has defined democracy as something that serves colonialism. It is the theft of our resources. You have the colonial mode of production that's at work now. So we say self-determination is the highest expression of democracy. The struggle against colonialism, highest expression of democracy. That's the thing that takes the whole human society into the future, destroying the colonial mode of production, etc. So that's what we're looking at when we look at the issue of democracy. We're talking about, again, the content of the society that is something that we assault. And then with this, we have ourselves, and we have achieved this place. We are now on the cusp of an actual socialist revolution where democracy is going to be defined with the workers being in power, and the workers now constituting a dictatorship of the working class. Because, as Comrade Secretary General Luwezi said, what democracy does, as they define it, is hide the existence of the working class, of the ruling class, the dictatorship. It's a hidden dictatorship. That's how they refer to democracy. You can go and vote. So the dictatorship is hidden. You have some freedom of mobility, generally speaking, if you're not African or something like that, where you still suffer colonialism, even if you live in a situation like in the United States. So this is what we're looking at, Comrade Luwezi. Understanding, I think, first of all, that when you look at the issue of democracy, you're talking about a form of the state. Who controls the state? The colonizer controls the state. And so as long as colonialism exists, you can call it apartheid, you can call it fascism, you can call it democracy, you can call it liberalism, you can call it all those things, but it's still the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie that facilitates the ongoing existence of colonialism. So we say the highest expression of democracy for the colonized is self-determination. You make that through overturning the power of the colonizer. In this sense, we say that the leadership of our struggle has to be in the hands of the working class, African working class. Then you thrust humanity in a place of being able to achieve genuine democracy, which will be the working class now in power, becoming the new ruling class and imposing a dictatorship over the bourgeoisie. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman, and that dictatorship won't be hidden.
That's right. That's right.
Uhuru.
It's really interesting, Comrade Akile, when Barack Hussein Obama was first elected president of selected president of the United States, a lot of Africans globally were just euphoric. Just thought this was the best thing that's ever happened. Finally, we are free. And I got, as you know, you've heard the story. I've got this this text or email from someone we work closely with in St. Petersburg, and says it said something like to the effect that tomorrow morning we'll all the white people to report to the cotton fields at 8:00 a.m. Right, and so this was to be no hidden dictatorship. White people to the cotton fields, right? That's how that was interpreted, right? But it won't be hidden. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Well, comrades, we are about 9 minutes away, and we have one more question if we could take it. And I think it'll just be really good just to clarify a particular position. And, it just explains how African internationalism is the only, the theory of the African working class, which has brought us to the conclusions such as colonialism as the mode of production. And that question comes from Comrade Sifu Sankofa on Facebook. And they ask, why does the chairman say we are not Pan-Africanist? And that'll be the last question before we go into our wrap up today. So.
Because we're not Pan-Africanists. We are a continuum of the movement of Marcus Garvey. Garvey was an African fundamentalist, that the Pan-Africanists came into existence as a political force under the leadership of the NAACP and W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a critical factor for that white-led organization at that time. And it attacked Garvey. It attacked the notion of an all-African people, revolutionary movement, et cetera, and worked with the United States government to crush it. It was philosophically opposed to Africa for Africans at home and abroad. It didn't recognize that kind of thing. It never has. And what happens is, because of the shakiness, Pan-Africanism is not a philosophy, it's a concept. And it's not a theory, it's a concept. And I think Nkrumah characterized it as an aspiration. But the fact is that we are African internationalists, and our objective is to overturn this whole social system. We recognize that African people dispersed globally are one people, and that the leadership of the African working class for the liberation of the African nation and Africa itself is where the future lies. That's the philosophy of African internationalism, and Pan-Africanism does it because it's a shaky thing. What it has done, and it did everything. It tried to jail. It called for the jailing of Garvey. It did everything. It went to Liberia to get with the Liberian government to deny land to Garvey when he was trying to establish a land base on the continent of Africa. It worked with the United States government, and Garvey and Du Bois were both clear that they were not the same. And so, but because Du Bois and the Pan-Africanists never accomplished anything related to the struggle of African people, now what has happened is that they have attempted to appropriate Garvey. So they come up with a list of Pan-Africanists and they throw Garvey in the mix, even though people recognize that Garvey and Du Bois were in most serious kinds of struggle. But because people have, the Pan-Africanists have no philosophy, and because they have no program, and because they've never done anything, what they do is again, take Garvey and make Garvey theirs. And so Garvey was not a Pan-Africanist, never was. And so I say we are not Pan-Africanists because we are not Pan-Africanists. Uhuru, comrade. That's Sefu.
Sefu, yeah.
Yeah, Uhuru.
Uhuru, thank you, Chairman.
Comrade Luwezi, you should read Comrade Luwezi Kinshasa. He's written a lot on this struggle about Pan-Africanism and African internationalism. Uhuru.
Well, Chairman, I just want to say I profoundly unite with what you just lay out. That's definitely Pan-Africanism is what you exactly said. I just want to reiterate some of those points you already said. Pan-Africanists are opposed to African revolution. You will not see anywhere Pan-Africanists are calling for a united African revolution to complete the revolution of the 60s, to carry out the work of Marcus Garvey. You will not see that anywhere. If you see that, then you're looking at African internationalism. You will never see Africa, the Pan-Africanists saying the African working class must lead. You will never see that. If you see that, then you're looking at African internationalism. And Pan-Africanism is liberalism. And liberalism is anything except revolution. Everything goes, and we see Pan-Africanists, everybody has their own brand. You look at Nyerere, that's Nyerere. You look at Mandela, that's Mandela, and so on, and Pan-Africanism is the African petty bourgeoisie. We should not be liberal anymore in the black community. We're going to be saying this African working class, this is the African petty bourgeoisie, over there is the bourgeois colonizer. We should be clear. So Pan-Africanism, that's the African petty bourgeoisie. So you should be clear on that. And also, it's opportunism. And opportunism is the enemy from within. You're looking for enemy from within. Don't just say Uncle Tom. That's narrow. It does not inform you really. It's the opportunism. When you are with that Pan-Africanism in your mix, you're dealing for opportunities. You like it or not. And African internationalism basically is the medicine against Pan-Africanism, which is the medicine against opportunism. That's really one of the differences. When you're dealing for opportunism, you need to know how you're going to fight it. How do you fight opportunism? What are you going to use? Only one tool: African internationalism. So they take this struggle everywhere where we are, and that's really the beauty of being with Chairman Omali Yeshitela. You learn how to fight against opportunism, because the real leader for African people, at any moment, from Jean-Jacques Dessalines fighting against Toussaint Louverture, from Marcus Garvey fighting against Dubois, or Patrice Lumumba fighting against Chombe, and so on, you will see a really genuine African leader is always fighting against opportunism. And that's why I'm asking everyone to embrace Chairman Omali Yeshitela leadership and African internationalism.
Uhuru, director, we got to turn back over to the director. She's trying to control this process. Thank you so much, Comrade Secretary General Luwezi, Comrade Tafarie. Director.
Uhuru, yes. I mean, this is such a profound discussion, and I know we could go on and on, but we will be continuing with this series as colonialism as the mode of production and being able to expound on this more. And we'll see more Secretary General Luwezi and Director Tafarie again during this series. Director Tafarie, do you have any closing remarks before we pass it over to the chairman to officially wrap us up today?
Yes, Uhuru, comrade, again, I want to salute you and, the chairman, Omali Yeshitela, as well as ST Luwezi Kinshasa. And in my closing remarks, I just also want to respond to the Pan-Africanism thing, to say that, the Pan-Africanists don't do what we are doing in the African People's Socialist Party, because it's the unity of theory and practice. And you can see the Pan-Africanists don't have a regional strategy like we have here in the African People's Socialist Party. Like we have explained, like how the origins of this social system and how it has to die and the type of society that we're looking for. So you don't get that with Pan-Africanism. So that's why we are not that, and we are African internationalists. So I just want to, I salute the African People's Socialist Party, and I want to encourage people not to simply enjoy, listening to the chairman and SG Luwezi and myself and the African People's Socialist Party, but we have to join because without the intervention, without the participation of the overwhelming majority of African people, this African revolution cannot happen. It can only happen if we come through, join the African People's Socialist Party, be a member of the Uhuru movement, and let's make this African revolution. Uhuru.
Uhuru, that was Comrade Director Tafarie, the ASI Africa Region Director. We had Secretary General Luwezi Kinshasa live with us from London. And now Chairman Omali Yeshitela, we want to pass it over to you to give us our closing remarks before we conclude today's powerful discussion. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Comrade Director Ajapra, Director Akile, I just want to thank you for such an incredibly efficient discussion that we had today, and these comrades from the African Socialist International, leaders of the African Socialist International, Comrade Secretary General Luwezi, and Comrade Director of Organization Tafarie, the chair of the African People's Socialist Party in South Africa. Just want to really express appreciation to everyone. And this is an important kind of discussion that sometimes initially won't be understood, but I remember struggles I went through as a young person trying to achieve some kind of theoretical clarity and being completely dissatisfied with how the world was being explained first by liberal colonizers, capitalists, and what have you, some of whom call themselves communists. And then looking to try and find a way to go beyond where Comrade Malcolm X had taken us from his a study of Garvey and history and what have you, and just trying to find solutions. And I think this is a part of an ongoing process of developing the revolutionary project to liberate all of our Africa, and that's the only thing we'll be satisfied with. So I just want to thank everybody for being here with us today, and I'm hoping that we will also learn how to share, that we try to create a situation where people share, and I've been told you can share 50, 60, 100 times, but that's something that's going to be really important for us to bust through these algorithms that's been imposed on us by the bosses that control the social system. Thank you so much, comrades. Vanguard up. Relentlessly, Uhuru.
Uhuru, Chairman. Yes, again, want to just thank you all for participating. Want to salute our incredible panelists. This has been yet another profound discussion. The Colonialism as a Mode of Production series continues. So make sure to follow the Chairman on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Subscribe to the Burning Spear TV on YouTube to catch every episode of the Omali Taught Me Sunday Study. Build the African Revolution. Vanguard up. Uhuru, comrades. Uhuru.